Good morning. We will begin with the second session on the poem London by William Blake. We will first look at the themes that can be traced in the poem. The theme of the oppression of urban life. In London, the speaker takes a walk through the titular city and finds only misery. The dirty and dangerous city is an intense expression of human life, not at its fullest, but at its most depraved and impoverished. Blake was notably writing at a time when the Industrial Revolution was at full pace, restructuring society in a way that he believed made people lose sight of what it means to be human. Blake uses London to argue that this urban environment is inherently oppressive and denies people the freedom to live happy, joyful lives. The poem opens with the speaker's experience of walking through the city. Through the speaker's eyes and ears, the reader gets a strong sense of the dismal, meaning unhappy, dark lives of the Londoners. That is, the people who live in the city of London. The people are marked by weakness and woe. The streets and even the river Thames are chartered. That is, their courses have been decided for them. Rivers are often a symbol of freedom, but not in this poem. The speaker also hears pain everywhere. It is in every voice, even that of newborn babies, and it is caused by mind-forged manacles. Manacles are a type of physical restraint like handcuffs, but these particular manacles are mind-forged. That is, they come from thought rather than the physical world. The root cause of London's misery, it seems, is the way that humanity thinks about itself, the way that society has been conceived and developed. The speaker suggests that society could be joyful, free, and full of love, but that people's fear, greed, and thirst for power have made the urban environment unbearably oppressive. Though the poem does not delve or dig too deeply into the way it thinks society should be, it's very clear about the strong links between misery and its urban setting. At the time of Blake's writing, London was, and still is, one of the busiest, most developed urban environments in the world. The poem argues that this way of life, with its focus on economic activity and individualism, is fundamentally flawed. To emphasize the point that the city environment itself oppresses its inhabitants, the speaker gestures, means makes a movement by hand or points towards some of the desperate measures people take in order to survive. The chimney sweepers, who are only children, put their health at great risk to earn a living. Both the soldiers and the harlots, meaning female prostitutes, in different ways must sell their bodies in order to survive. In other words, everyone is trapped by their situation, forced to exchange the only things they have, that is, their bodies, in order to paradoxically keep those bodies alive. Paradoxically means this is the contradiction here. विरोधाभास जिसको हिंदी में कहते हैं. What is more, the poem offers no real hope that society may find a way to cast off its mind-forged manacles. Note that the poem emphasizes the next generation in closing on the youthful harlots and the newborn infants. This image turns what should be a joyous celebration of new life into an initiation into poverty, pain, and hopelessness. Initiation can be introduction, being introduced to something. It implies the cyclical nature of London's poverty and suggests that people don't have the freedom to escape their urban woes. Woes means sorrows. The poem then views modern city life as hopelessly oppressive. With the Industrial Revolution at full pace, London was undergoing significant and speedy changes. The poem argues these changes aren't for the better, and its criticism of London may be just as relevant to today's cities. Next is the theme of corruption of childhood. London also touches on an important theme throughout Blake's work, one that is specially prominent in his Songs of Innocence and Experience: the corruption of childhood. Blake believed that people are born with everything they need for a joyful, loving, and happy life, but that the adult world corrupts this innocent state. In this poem, the speaker describes how children are essentially crushed by the adult world, thus building a vivid argument supporting Blake's broader belief. The speaker of London presents urban children as being in distress from the moment they are born. For example, line 15 describes how newborn babies are blasted by the curses of their impoverished prostitute mothers. Impoverished means very poor. With this image, the speaker gestures towards an ongoing cycle of misery. Miserable mothers lead to miserable children, who may themselves create some more miserable children later on. That is integral to the urban environment. Similarly, in line 6, infants are characterized as consistently crying, and these cries are specifically related to the fear they feel. It is as though they can sense the misery around them before they have even developed the ability to meaningfully perceive, meaning understand, and make sense of the world. Perhaps the most poignant reference to childhood corruption is in line 9, when the speaker discusses the chimney sweepers. Chimney sweeping was a brutal but very common profession in London in Blake's day, and it was work that children were frequently sold or forced into. Blake's The Chimney Sweeper poems discuss this theme in greater detail. Like the prostitutes and the soldiers mentioned elsewhere in the poem, the impoverished children of London are forced to exchange their one possession, that is their bodies, for money, food, and or lodging. Lodging means their living quarters, a room where they can stay. In other words, they give up their childhood when they should be playing and learning about the world in order to merely survive. And doing so, of course, actually diminishes, meaning reduces, their chances of survival because chimney sweeping places them in toxic and physically dangerous environments. Dangerous because they might lose their holding and fall down the chimney onto the hot burning coals in the fireplace. Through the images of childhood suffering that the speaker observes and creates for readers, Blake seems to suggest that the mind forged manacles of urban life and industrialization corrupt society. Now we will look at some of the poetic devices and figurative language used in the poem London. First, alliteration. Definition of alliteration. Alliteration is a figure of speech in which the same sound repeats in a group of words, such as the B sound in Bob brought the box of bricks to the basement. The repeating sound must occur either in the first letter of each word or in the stressed syllables of those words. Alliteration occurs in all 4 stanzas of London. In lines 3 and 4, the numerous M and W sounds create a sense of abundant misery. Every person the speaker walks past shows marks of weakness and woe. The M is associated with these marks, and accordingly, the 4 appearances of M in these lines mirror the way the speaker encounters people on his walk. In line 8, the M sound appears again. Here it helps give the phrase mind forged manacles its terrible power. The phrase refers to the oppressive restrictions that humanity places upon itself, which, in the speaker's view, are the result of a collective failure to imagine a better society based on love and freedom. The M sound here picks up on the association with misery established in the first stanza and also helps create a feeling of entrapment. The first word of the phrase starts with M, and so does the last, meaning that the phrase itself is in a way surrounded by M. It also echoes the M of man in line 5, strengthening the link between the manacles and human beings. The sonic similarity suggests that people are inherently prone to entrapping themselves, that these shackles aren't simply mind forged but also man forged, because the oppression of city life is something humanity has created for itself. In the third stanza, lines 10 and 12 alliterate through the words blackening and blood. Both have negative associations, and both are associated with 2 of the sources of London's oppression: the official church and the state or monarchy. The alliteration helps underline the way that society's authorities are directly responsible for people's pain and impoverishment. This is further reflected in the CH consonants of chimney and church. And just as the first 2 stanzas are linked by the M alliteration, the 4th stanza shares the BL sound with the 3rd stanza. This time it's used for 2 verbs, both of which describe destruction: blasts and blights. This helps create a sense that this destruction, like the city's oppression, is inescapable. Inescapable means you cannot run away from it. Altogether, the repetition of sounds in the poem thus contributes to the sense that the misery of city life is cyclical and feeds upon itself. Next is allusion, the second poetic device of the poem. Definition of allusion. What is an allusion? Here is a quick and simple definition. In literature, an allusion is an unexplained reference to someone or something outside of the text. Writers commonly allude to other literary works, famous individuals, historical events, or philosophical ideas, and they do so in order to layer associations and meanings from these sources onto their own work. Allusions can also occur in media other than literature, such as film, visual arts, or even casual conversation. If you have ever responded to betrayal with a dramatic cry of "Et tu Brutus," you too Brutus, then you have made an allusion to a famous line from Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. Understanding allusions. Imagine if every time someone used the expression, "it was a real Cinderella story," they had to retell the entire story of Cinderella to explain exactly what they meant. By using an allusion to a classic fairy tale that a majority of people will already know, a speaker can dramatically shorten what would have been a much lengthier explanation. However, in order for an allusion to achieve its intended effect, the person making the allusion needs to make accurate assumptions about what knowledge the audience already has. A few key things or factors into whether someone will or won't catch on an allusion included by a writer. How are allusions and references different? There is a lot of confusion, particularly online, about what kinds of references count as allusions and which are merely references. There are two different ways that people draw a distinction between allusions and references. Allusions must be indirect, while references are direct. This school of thought holds that an allusion can only be an allusion if it is indirect, in the sense that what is being alluded to is not explicitly named. So, people who believe this would say that the example, "it was a real Cinderella story," that we gave above shouldn't count as an allusion because it names the thing it's referencing directly. Under this definition, for the previous statement to be an allusion, it would have to be something like, "it was a glass slipper ending," a reference to Cinderella that does not explicitly use the main character's name. Allusions must not be further explained. This second position holds that it does not matter if an allusion is direct or indirect, but rather that an allusion is only an allusion if it is not followed by further explanation that tries to make the allusion's meaning or source clear to the reader. While either definition of an allusion is valid and defensible, we tend to lean towards the second interpretation because in some cases the line between whether an allusion has been provided in a way that is direct or indirect can be so subtle that it is actually difficult to tell if it is indirect or not. For that reason, it seems simpler and easier to just go with the second definition. Coming back to the poem, it's possible that the use of chartered is an allusion to Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. This book argued in favor of the principles of the French Revolution, published in the year 1789. In it, Paine makes a remark that quite possibly informs Blake's use of chartered here. Every chartered town is an aristocratical monopoly of itself. In other words, Paine is saying that the layout and organization of a city reflect its imbalance of power, power which is concentrated in the hands of a small ruling class. Of London specifically, Paine makes another remark echoed in this poem. It is a market where every man has his price and where corruption is common traffic. This line seems to echo the poem's suggestion that everyone in London, from the chimney sweeps to the prostitutes, has no choice but to sell themselves to survive. Interestingly, in the poem's first draft, both instances of chartered read dirty instead. Chartered must have seemed to better reflect the specific points about London's oppression that Blake wanted the poem to make, and it may be that the word choice was inspired by Paine's similar points. Next, let us look at metaphor in the poem. First, the definition. A metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two different things by saying that one thing is the other. The comparison in a metaphor can be stated explicitly, meaning clearly, as in the sentence, "Love is a battlefield." Other times, the writer may make this equation between two things implicitly, meaning indirectly, as in, "He was wounded by love." The comparisons created by metaphor are not meant to be taken literally. Rather, metaphors are figurative. In other words, they create meaning beyond the literal meanings of their words. For instance, these examples are, of course, not saying that love is actually a field of battle or that the person actually got a physical injury from love. Instead, they capture how love can be painful, a struggle, even a showdown between opponents, and, as many good metaphors do, through their comparison, they make description more vivid, more relatable, or reveal new ways of seeing the world. Metaphor occurs twice in London. The first instance is arguably the thematic heart of the poem, the mine-forged manacles of line 8. In reality, manacles are metal chains, that bind people's ankles or hands, the kind that might be used on a group of prisoners. हथकड़ियाँ जिनमें चेन जुड़ी हुई होती है. Of course, the speaker does not mean that the inhabitants of London are literally chained up. Instead, the manacles are a metaphor for the way in which the people described in the poem are oppressed both socially and psychologically by the city that they live in. But it is more complicated than that. These manacles aren't just the external difficulties presented by a city like London. They are forged or created in the mind. That is, they are made in the human imagination rather than the physical world. The poem does not suggest that they are created by the very people whom they oppress, but rather seems to indicate a more collective failure to imagine a better way that society could be organized and allowed to flourish. Essentially, this line is calling out a basic tendency in mankind to impose restrictions and limitations on itself that then cause pain and impoverishment to many of its people. The administrators of these manacles, the people that make sure they are tightly fitted on the lives of the London inhabitants, are those in positions of authority. For example, the official church of line 10 and the monarchy, that is the palace, of line 12. The second metaphor is in the final two words of the poem, marriage hearse. Of course, no such thing exists. This seems to be an imaginary vehicle that the speaker imagines existing in the streets of London. But the metaphor serves to highlight the way that even love, as suggested by marriage, is closely linked to death in dismal places like London. That's all for today. We'll continue to look at other aspects of the poem in the next session. Thank you.